Broadly speaking, the story of Horus is as follows. Horus was born on December 25th of the Virgin Isis Mary. His birth was accompanied by a star in the east, and upon his birth he was adored by 3 kings. At the age of 12, he was a prodigal child teacher, and at the age of 30, he was baptized by a figure known as Anup, and thus began his ministry. Horus had 12 disciples he traveled about with, performing miracles such as healing the sick and walking on water. Horus was known by many gestural names such as the Truth, the Light, God's Anointed Son, the Good Shepherd, the Lamb of God, and many others. After being betrayed by Typhon, Horus was crucified, buried for 3 days, and thus resurrected. These attributes of Horus, whether original or not, seem to permeate many cultures of the world, for many other gods are found to have the same general mythological structure. Attis of Phrygia, born of the Virgin Nana on December 25th, crucified, placed in a tomb, and after 3 days was resurrected. Krishna of India, born of the Virgin Devaki, with a star in the east signaling his coming. He performed miracles with his disciples, and, upon his death, was resurrected. Dionysius of Greece, born of a virgin on December 25th, was a traveling teacher who performed miracles such as turning water into wine. He was referred to as the King of Kings, God's only begotten Son, the Alpha and Omega, and many others. And, upon his death, he was resurrected. Mithra of Persia, born of a virgin on December 25th, he had 12 disciples and performed miracles, and upon his death was buried for 3 days and thus resurrected. He was also referred to as the Truth, the Light, and many others. Interestingly, the sacred day of worship of Mithra was Sunday. The fact of the matter is, there are numerous saviors from different periods from all over the world which subscribe to these general characteristics.
The first thing I want to say, folks, is this is an old idea. Okay, there's nothing really new here. Sometimes somebody will present this like, wow, isn't this a new thing and such like that. But this has actually been around for a long time. In the 19th century, there was a movement in Germany called the History of Religions School. That movement went on there. And the purpose of that movement was trying to demonstrate that all religions of the world basically are related and came together from one other religion. And this was a common tactic, to look at the parallels between all the different religions of the world, to try to trace the fact that they all were basically related together in some way or another. But this particular movement, folks, was just simply, by the 1930s, it completely died out because scholars simply said there's just simply no evidence for that claim whatsoever. And many of the sources that we actually saw cited there in the Zeitgeist movie come from the 19th century, and many of the writers that were part of this kind of thinking that was going on at the time here. For example, Gerald Massey was a 19th century poet and amateur Egyptologist. He wrote 2 works, The Historical Jesus and the Mystical Christ, and Ancient Egypt, the Light of the World. Thomas Doane wrote Bible Myths and Their Parallels in Other Religions, published in 1882. And of course, probably one of the most famous is James Frazer's The Golden Bough, a multi-volume work where he tries to draw all of this together, published in 1890 here. 40% of the citations used to support the 7 minutes that you just saw there come from these 3 sources. Okay, all these 19th century sources that have really been abandoned by scholars. My second fallacy is what I call the terminology fallacy. Basically, this fallacy says events in the lives of the mythical gods are expressed using Christian terminology in order subtly to manipulate viewers into accepting that the same events in the life of Jesus also happen in the lives of the other mythical gods. Look at all the terminology they use to describe that. How much of that comes from Christianity? Baptism, crucified, resurrected. Do we see these words in other religions? No, not at all. Okay, they're not there at all. They just use those words to describe some event in that other religion that's kind of like what Jesus did, and then they say, see, it's the same thing. That's where they got it from in some way or another. Let's take a look at just a few of these, if I can, for a moment here. First of all, virginal births. Let's talk about that. You saw all these gods that were born of a virgin, okay? In fact, is that really true? Well, Horus. How did Horus come about? Okay? Well, Horus actually, the story of the creation of Horus is actually somewhat complex. One of the things you need to understand is that unlike Christianity, which we have a pretty good basic story of Jesus, ancient pagan myths, oftentimes the story is incomplete, it's complex, there's different versions of it out there, sometimes completely different versions of it out there, okay? And it's really hard to put it together. okay, in some way or another. So, for example, Horus, the most common version of the creation of Horus, okay, is that his father, okay, was killed by Set. Okay, Osiris was his father. He was killed by Oset. Oset cut his body up into 13 parts and spread the 13 parts throughout Egypt. His mother, Isis, went around gathering the 13 parts of Osiris together. She found 12 of them, but couldn't find the 13th part, which was his phallus. Okay, so what she did was she took a stick of wood, she created a wooden phallus, okay, put it in place of his phallus, then she hovered above Horus, okay, or Osiris, excuse me, hovered above Osiris and became pregnant, and that's where we get Horus from. Okay, that's hardly a virginal birth in the same sense. Kind of bizarre. Okay, how about Attis? Where did Attis come from? Well, with Attis, the story of the birth of Attis is very simple. Zeus, the god Zeus, spills his seed on a mountain. Okay, and then Non, the mother of Attis, basically sits down. The seed grows up and becomes a pomegranate tree. She sits down under the pomegranate tree. The pomegranate falls from the tree into her lap. She's pregnant. Okay, virgin conception. Okay, is the idea there behind that. Okay, how about Krishna? Well, Krishna's mother Devaki had 7 children before Krishna. Don't think she was a virgin. Don't think so. Okay? These guys weren't born of virgin births at all. They weren't anything like the birth of Jesus. All of the virgin births, all of the supposed virgin births of the gods, all involve some sort of physical type of relationship between one physical being and another physical being. They're not at all like what we read concerning the virgin birth of Jesus. What about the crucifixion? Okay? We're told that all these gods were crucified. Well, is that true? Well, Krishna was shot in the heel with an arrow. Okay? Hardly a crucifixion. There's a piercing. Well, see? Crucifixion. See? It's the same thing. Okay? Attis castrated himself, fled into the woods, and died. Well, he spilled his blood. Okay, like Jesus. Crucifixion. Okay? Horus, well, again, depends upon the story. There's 3 different deaths of Horus. Either he never died at all, or he was stung by a scorpion, or his death sometimes is conflated with Osiris. Sometimes the Horus-Osiris story is complex. We're not sure if they're talking about Osiris, Horus, or whether the 2 of them are the same being. They could be. We're just not sure. There's just too much information we don't know. How about a resurrection here? Well, again, Horus is made Lord of the underworld. Hardly a resurrection, okay, at that particular point. He never returns to this world, never returns to life in this world, okay? Attis was turned into a pine tree. Hardly a resurrection, okay? Krishna, earliest tradition says he returned to the spirit world. In fact, the tradition that says Krishna resurrected was a tradition that developed about the 7th century. At that particular point, well, the 7th century, folks, that's 700 years after Christ. Okay, and many Hindu scholars will tell you that that story about Krishna was probably borrowed from Christianity, not the other way around. Okay, in fact, this quote comes from Jonathan Smith, who wrote an article on dying and rising gods for the Encyclopedia of the Religion. Now, the Encyclopedia of Religion is a very scholarly work, and he makes this comment here. He said, all of the deities that have been identified as belonging to the class of dying and rising deities can be subsumed under 2 larger classes of disappearing deities or dying deities. In the first case, the deities return but have not died. In the second case, the gods die but do not return. There is no, and I repeat, no unambiguous instance in the history of religions, he's talking about the pagan religions, of dying and rising deities. None, not one. We just don't have that. Well, I want you to take a journey with me. We're going to go 2,000 years into the future. Let me turn on the right slide here. 2,000 years in the future, after a cataclysmic event, okay, we've had some sort of cataclysmic event, World War 4000, whatever, okay? Only a handful of documents are now left in the world for us to kind of piece together the history of the 20th century, okay? The life of, somebody comes up with a theory that the life of John F. Kennedy is a myth. Didn't really happen. It was based on the Lincoln myth, another myth that didn't really happen. Now, why do they say that? Look at the parallels. Okay, Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1806. Kennedy was 1846. Kennedy was elected to Congress in 1946. Ooh. Lincoln was elected president in 1860. Kennedy was elected president in 1960. Lincoln and Kennedy each have 7 letters in their names. Okay? Lincoln had a secretary named Kennedy. Kennedy had a secretary named Lincoln. By the way, that's not true at all.
Right.
Lincoln did not have a secretary. Kennedy did have a secretary named Lincoln, but Lincoln had no secretary named Kennedy. That's just made up. Okay? The people thought, look, hey, if the pagan religion, why can't I do it? The copycats can. Okay? Both married in their 30s, a 24-year-old socially prominent girl who could speak fluent French. Both presidents dealt with civil rights movements for African Americans. Both presidents were assassinated on a Friday, let me make sure I get these right, in the back of the head before a major holiday while sitting next to their wives by assassins known by 3 names consisting of 15 letters: John Wilkes Booth, Lee Harvey Oswald. Oswald shot Kennedy from a warehouse and was captured in a theater. Booth shot Lincoln in a theater and was captured in a warehouse. Well, really a barn. But it's kind of a warehouse. No, it's kind of a warehouse. See, it's a warehouse. Both assassins were shot and killed with a Colt revolver days after they assassinated the president, and both before they could be brought to trial. And finally, both presidents were succeeded by vice presidents named Johnson. Let me see, I'm behind my thing here. Okay, behind President named Johnson, born in 1808 and 1908, respectively. See?
All right.